Inside the folder were dozens of files. Some short voice memos, some longer discussions, notes, drafts of letters, PR briefs, presentation slides, even a whole document outlining the timeline of brand independence, allegedly created before they had even stepped down as working royals. Let's break that down. The timeline, not a reaction to royal cruelty, not a spontaneous escape, but a planned rollout. Now think about the dates. They left the royal family officially in March 2020. By Q4, October through December, they had signed their multi-million-dollar Netflix deal. That's either a coincidence or something far more calculated. So again, if you were Harry and you saw this with your own eyes, what would you feel? Betrayal? Shame? Or just stupidity? Because let's be honest, no one wants to believe they've been played. Especially not someone who's gone to war for the person holding the knife. And here's where the emotional gut punch really lands. Harry, according to people close to him, didn't get angry right away. He got quiet, withdrawn, not cold, just gutted. The kind of silence that only comes from a realization you can't unsee. Because it wasn't just a betrayal of him. It was a betrayal of his story. The very thing he built his new life on. The narrative that he and Meghan had been the victims. Trapped, silenced, pushed out. Now he had evidence suggesting it may have all been a ruse. Power play. And worse, he may have been part of it. Used, played, and then packaged as the broken prince in a global marketing campaign. So what did he do? Here's the twist. Nothing. Not at first. He didn't storm out. Didn't file for divorce. Didn't confront Meghan screaming in the kitchen, Lifetime movie style. Instead, he started listening more. Reading more. Connecting dots. Because if the tapes were real, if this version of Meghan was the real one, then he needed to understand how deep it went. And that's when he found something even more disturbing. A second folder. Hidden deeper in the drive. Encrypted, but not unbreakable. And inside, let's just say, it wasn't audio. Not this time. The second folder wasn't labeled with anything suspicious. In fact, it looked like an archive. Innocent. Boring even. Just a date range. JN_2016-2018. But inside, Prince Harry allegedly found what he later described to a confidant as a curated playbook. Emails, strategy documents, even scanned handwritten notes, likely Meghan's, outlining plans, contacts, timelines, and, most disturbingly, language. Yes, language. Phrases to use in interviews. Sentences designed to elicit sympathy. Keywords tailored to media trends of the moment. Silenced. Strong woman. Institutional trauma. This wasn't improvisation. This was messaging. One email thread reportedly had the subject line, narrative structuring core talking points. And the recipient? Not Harry. Not family. Not even a publicist he knew. But a private PR agency tied to high-level Hollywood clients. The same firm, according to insiders, that helped rebrand public figures after scandals. The kind of people you hire before the story hits the fan. Not after. So again, the question screams, what was she planning? And more importantly, how long had she been planning it? Because remember, this wasn't post-Megxit. These documents were from before the wedding. Let that settle. Imagine sitting in your home, feet away from your wife, looking through files written years before your marriage, detailing a strategic approach to how your relationship would be used. Not loved. Used. This cold. This brutal. This calculating. And for Harry, it was like looking at the blueprint of a con. Not just a betrayal of love, but of intent. He wasn't just her partner. He was her campaign. Some files appeared to be drafts of speeches and articles. Lines that would later echo in real-world interviews almost word for word. I wasn't protected. I was silenced. They didn't want my child to have a title. Now think about this. If those lines were written and rehearsed before the incidents allegedly occurred, what does that say? Were those experiences real? Or were they crafted? Molded? Massaged? Do you see where this goes? It doesn't just call Meghan's motives into question. It casts doubt on the entire timeline of events we've been fed for the last 6 years. And Harry? He's now sitting on top of this information, wondering if the pain he felt was manipulated for someone else's agenda. But here's the kicker. Among the files was one particular note, scribbled, short, but devastating. It read, "Control the story or be the story." 6 words. And Harry reportedly stared at that line for over an hour. Because that's what it had always been about, hadn't it? Controlling the story. From the Oprah interview to the Netflix docuseries, from archetypes to the tell-all memoir, everything was part of the story. Their story. But what if that story was fake? Or worse, engineered for maximum sympathy? And now we arrive at the moment Harry broke his silence. Privately, not publicly. According to a longtime associate, he called someone from his past. Someone he hadn't spoken to since before the split. The source wouldn't name the person, but speculation points to an old friend from his military days. Someone grounded. Someone unafraid to speak bluntly. And what did Harry say? Just one thing. "I think I've been played." The line stunned his friend. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Dead quiet. No anger. No rage. Just a numb kind of clarity. As if he'd been underwater for years. And finally breached the surface. From that moment on, things changed. Harry reportedly stopped attending certain brand meetings. He started asking questions about finances, contracts, publicity control. He called people he hadn't spoken to in years. And then, just recently, he told someone else, a different source entirely, that he was thinking of recording a counter-narrative. Not to attack Meghan, not to blow up the family all over again, but to tell his side finally and fully, without editing, without spin, without her voice over his. And here's the wild part. He didn't say he felt betrayed by Meghan alone. He said he felt complicit. He said, quote, "I helped sell the lie. I helped destroy my family. I need to undo that." Now ask yourself, why would he say that? What changed? The recordings? The files? Or was it always there? And he's only just now able to see it? And here's the final twist for now. Buried within that second folder was one final audio file. Short, less than 2 minutes. Labeled simply, "Element Surveillance Circuit 23. Insiders claim it was Meghan's voice rehearsing a line, over and over, tweaking the inflection, changing the emotion, repeating the same sentence with different tonal choices. The line? "I just wanted to be heard." She said it with sadness, with resolve, with defiance. And then, on the final take, she said it with a laugh. That file is now burned into Harry's mind. Not just because of what was said, but because of what it meant. Because if that laugh was real, if it was genuine, then nothing else was. Not the marriage, not the escape, not the truth bombs, and certainly not the love. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Because someone else, someone inside the palace, has been keeping receipts too. And they've just sent Harry something that flips the entire narrative upside down. Have you ever wondered what royal staff really say behind the scenes? Not in the press, not in official interviews, but in private, in whispers, in scribbled notes, in texts never meant for the public. Because let's be honest, palace staff are trained for silence. They're vetted, sworn to discretion, raised in a culture of loyalty to the crown, not the individuals who wear it. But even they have a breaking point, and now one of them, someone who worked in close proximity to both Prince Harry and Meghan, has reportedly done something unthinkable. They reached out to Harry, not with gossip, not with opinion, with proof. Because it turns out, Meghan wasn't the only one keeping files. The palace? They document everything. And someone inside Kensington Palace has been sitting on a stash of internal memos, emails, and incident reports for years, waiting for the right moment. And that moment came right after Harry's silence broke. Here's what we know. The contact was anonymous at first. Encrypted message. No name. No return info. Just a line. You don't know half of what she did to them. And to you. Attached. A heavily redacted PDF. And on page 1, the royal insignia watermark. The real deal. What followed was a series of records, notes, and internal comms between palace staff from early 2018 through 2019, the heart of the Sussexes' time inside the firm. And the contents? Let's just say they didn't paint Meghan as a victim. They painted her as a strategist. Or worse, an operator. Let's start with the staff turnover. You probably heard about it in the news back then. Duchess Difficult, they called her. Media buzzwords. But inside the palace, it was chaos. According to one internal email, dated April 17, 2018, a senior aide wrote, "We are on our third assistant in 6 months. She cries in the bathroom between tasks. Has asked to be transferred twice." That email was sent to an HR liaison, with the subject line, "Urgent staff welfare." And there were more. Notes detailing demands, screaming matches, instructions given late at night, revoked in the morning, then reinstated hours later. One aide, in a personal message leaked to Harry via the anonymous source, wrote, "She treats kindness like weakness. It's never enough. And she never forgets a slight." These weren't disgruntled employees venting. These were professionals, career staffers, people who'd worked for Charles, for William, even for the Queen herself, suddenly pushed to emotional breaking points. And what did Harry do during all this? He defended her. Every single time. According to a redacted HR note marked "Senior Level Intervention," Harry once told a staff member, "You're misunderstanding her tone. She's just American." But behind the scenes, more and more staff requested transfers. The nickname Hurricane Meghan started being whispered in private. And then came the worst report of all. One document, heavily censored, but legible, summarized a formal complaint from a royal assistant who claimed Meghan had deliberately humiliated her in front of other staff, including Harry, and accused her of failing to anticipate needs. The note ended with this sentence: "The employee was left in tears and has since gone on extended mental health leave." That report was buried, never followed up. And now, it's in Harry's hands. So ask yourself, why would someone inside the palace send this to him? After years of being branded a traitor? After Harry accused the royal family of failing him? Why now? The answer may surprise you, because not everyone inside the institution is as cold and robotic as the press makes them seem. One of the messages reportedly included this handwritten line: "You were lied to too. We tried to protect you. She wouldn't let us." Let's pause. That changes everything. Because if true, it means there were people inside who saw what was happening, who knew Meghan's behavior wasn't just cultural clash or media exaggeration. It was something darker. And Harry? He wasn't in control. He was being controlled. You remember how fast things moved in those days? The whirlwind romance, the lightning-fast engagement, the global wedding, the headlines, the baby announcement, the interviews. But now it looks like all of that may have been cover for something much more manipulative. Internal documents suggest Meghan frequently met with her own private team, PR, legal, and branding, separate from royal media staff. A clear breach of protocol. She wasn't playing by the rules. She was writing her own. And the royal family? They let her, because they didn't want another scandal. Not after Diana. Not after Andrew. Not after everything else. So they tolerated her. They silenced their own people. And Harry, trapped between love and legacy, chose to ignore the growing whispers. But those whispers are now documented. And someone inside the system just handed Harry the proof. There's one document in particular that insiders say broke him. It was a calendar note, a meeting agenda, marked, "Private Meeting Duke and Duchess, Risk Assessment." The document lists agenda items. Most are dull. But bullet point number 4 reads, "Manage spouse-induced staff attrition. Develop protocol for future HR fallout. Prioritize PR shielding of the Duke." Translation: the palace had already identified Meghan as the cause of internal breakdown, and Harry as the one most vulnerable to damage. Not the Queen, not Charles, Harry, because even they saw it coming. They saw the manipulation, the isolation, the damage, and they tried, however quietly, to protect him. But by then it was too late. Harry was in love, enchanted, and angry at anyone who dared question her. Meghan was a master at framing criticism as persecution. Any pushback became an act of oppression. Any accountability was racism. Any disagreement, emotional violence. She weaponized the palace's silence. And Harry? He mistook that silence for complicity. Now he knows better, because when those documents arrived in his inbox, a wall crumbled. For the first time in years, Harry saw the full picture, unfiltered, raw, and horrifying. The red flags he missed, the warnings he ignored, the people he cut off in defense of someone who may have been orchestrating the entire fallout. And now he can't unsee it. Because the most painful realization isn't that Meghan may have manipulated them. It's that she manipulated him. And as he stared at the words, "prioritize PR shielding of the Duke," something snapped. Not in anger, in regret. They tried to shield him from her. And now, years later, he finally understands why. But what does he do with that knowledge? Speak out? Leave? Or does he bury it again like the palace did? That's what he's wrestling with now. Because even with the truth, there are still consequences. And Meghan? She's not done yet. Because what Harry doesn't know, what he hasn't seen yet, is a private journal Meghan kept during her early days inside the palace. And what's written in it is worse than anything he's heard so far. What happens when the fairy tale starts before the prince even walks into the story? Long before Harry ever slid into her DMs. Long before the blind date, the matching bracelets, the royal engagement, Meghan Markle already had a script in mind. Not a metaphorical one. An actual one. This chapter isn't about the palace. It's not about the wedding or the media or even the family. This is about her before him. Because to understand how this all unraveled, how the once golden couple spiraled into isolation, scandal, and betrayal, you have to understand Meghan. Not the Duchess, the actress, and not the actress on screen, the one off screen, the one building a brand before there was ever a crown in sight. Because Meghan wasn't discovered by Harry. She was already building the role she wanted to play, and he was just the final casting. Let's start in 2015. Meghan's career was plateauing. Suits was her biggest credit. A solid show, sure, but she wasn't the breakout star. She was the side character, the supporting arc. Ask yourself, can you name a single Rachel Zane line? Exactly. She was known more for her Instagram than her acting. Her lifestyle blog, The Tig, was gaining traction. She was attending Fashion Week. According to someone who claims to have read Meghan's private journal, the same one Harry allegedly uncovered recently, there were early entries where Meghan detailed her non-negotiables for a life partner. And one of them? Status. But not traditional. Global. Historic. Iconic. That's not a description of a soulmate. That's a checklist. Another excerpt, allegedly from the same journal, said, "He must understand his power and be willing to reimagine it." Sound familiar? That's almost verbatim what Harry's done since marrying her. Coincidence? Maybe. But when Harry read those words, raw, unedited, and written before they even met, he reportedly went silent for hours, because the subtext was loud. She wasn't looking for a partner. She was looking for a symbol. Let's go deeper. In early 2016, Meghan gave an interview where she said, "I'm the kind of girl who believes you can change the world with the right platform." A throwaway quote, right? Not when you realize she said that 2 months before she met Harry. 2 months before she stepped into the most powerful platform on earth, the British royal family. And now, years later, Harry's realizing he may not have been the love story. He may have been the platform. So, how did Meghan transition from Hollywood side character to global icon? By doing what she's always done, controlling the story. And here's the irony. She didn't need the palace's help. She didn't even need the monarchy's protection. She needed conflict. Because conflict fuels interest. Conflict creates sides. Conflict gives power. And Meghan, by design or instinct, knew how to turn a complicated institution into the perfect foil for her own narrative. The lonely American. the silenced woman, the modern wife, the new Diana. But now, with the journal exposed, with the past recontextualized, and with Harry finally seeing the machine behind the curtain, he's questioning everything. Because if the marriage wasn't what it seemed, if the intent wasn't pure, if he was just the final chapter in a story already being written, then what happens next? Does he leave? Does he speak? Or does he do the unthinkable and return? Because Meghan may have scripted the love story, but Harry, he just found the pen. And the next chapter might not be written for her. What happens when an actress steps onto the world's biggest stage and refuses to stick to the script? What happens when one woman's image becomes more important than an institution centuries old? And what happens when the people who've mastered silence are forced to fight back? This wasn't just a culture clash. This wasn't about race, tradition, or outdated protocols. This was war, not with weapons, with optics. And from the moment Meghan Markle walked through the palace gates, she understood something most royals had long ignored. In the modern world, it's not about truth. It's about control. Of the narrative, of the camera, of the moment. And once she realized that the firm wasn't going to hand her that control, she took it anyway. Let's rewind to late 2018. Behind the scenes, the honeymoon phase was over. Staff turnover was high. Royal aides were complaining. The Queen's private secretary reportedly requested intervention over internal disruption in the Sussex household. But in public, Meghan was glowing, literally glowing. Stunning outfits, confident speeches, baby bump, flashbulbs, flawless. And that's when it started, the split screen. Inside, tension. Outside, triumph. And she played it perfectly. If there was bad press, it was spun as victimhood. If there were questions, they were framed as attacks. If there was criticism, it was sexism or racism. The story she crafted and carefully delivered to select outlets was airtight. She was the modern woman challenging a backward institution. The truth? Far murkier. But truth didn't matter. Only what people believed. This is where it gets surgical. Because while the palace moved with centuries of caution, Meghan moved like a modern campaign. She knew how media cycles worked. She knew which headlines hit hardest. And she had one major advantage. The royal family couldn't fight back. By tradition, they don't clap back. They don't rebut interviews. They don't fire off angry tweets or run smear campaigns. But Meghan, she could. And she did. She had friends in the media, writers, bloggers, editors, people willing to set the record straight under the guise of anonymous sourcing. And when that didn't work, she became the source herself. Remember that infamous anonymous friend quote in People magazine? The one where Meghan was defending herself from palace cruelty? That wasn't a rogue friend going off script. According to court documents later filed in her lawsuit against the Mail on Sunday, Meghan approved that campaign. She knew. She directed it. And the palace? They were blindsided. The power dynamic shifted overnight. Not internally. The firm still had structure, tradition, resources, but externally, in the media, in the public eye, Meghan was winning because she had what the palace didn't: emotionally charged storytelling. Think about it. When did you last hear the Queen explain herself? Or Charles clap back at a rumor? They don't. They never have. But Meghan, she was everywhere. On podcasts, on stage, in interviews, speaking about her truth. And when Oprah happened, it was checkmate. Let's break that interview down. 2 people, a garden, a primetime audience of 17 million, and a flood of bombshells. They didn't protect me. There were concerns about Archie's skin color. I was suicidal, and they ignored me. Each line crafted for maximum impact. Each revelation landing like a bullet. Now let's ask the hard question. How many of those claims were ever proven? How many were later walked back, clarified, or contradicted? The skin color claim? Harry later said it wasn't the Queen or Prince Philip, but never clarified who it was. The title denial for Archie? Protocol, not prejudice. Being silenced? She gave more interviews in 2 years than the Queen gave in a decade. But none of that mattered, because by the time the truth surfaced, the story had already taken root. And the damage? Permanent. This is what Harry didn't see at first. He thought they were fighting back together. He thought they were defending themselves against a cruel machine. But now, after the files, the tapes, the journals, he's seeing it differently. He's realizing Meghan wasn't reacting to the system. She was weaponizing it. She used the palace's silence as guilt. She used its caution as control. She cast herself as the outsider, despite having staff, protection, and access most royals would dream of. And Harry? He was the sympathetic figure in the story. The prince who gave it all up for love. Except now, he's wondering if that love was leverage. Sources close to the palace have said one thing repeatedly since 2020. She didn't want to be royal. She wanted to be bigger than royalty. Think about that, because it explains everything. She didn't want to serve the crown. She wanted to outshine it, which is why, after stepping back from royal duties, she didn't retreat. She expanded. Netflix, Spotify, Hollywood deals, podcasts, production companies, and all of them built on the same foundational story. She was silenced. She escaped. And now she speaks. It was the perfect arc. Heroic, emotional, feminist, marketable. And Harry? He went along with it. He let himself become the sad-eyed co-star. The broken boy turned rebel prince. Because for a while he believed it. He believed they were telling the truth. Until the contradictions piled up. Until the private voice notes didn't match the public messages. Until the real Meghan started showing behind the curtain. And now he's waking up. So where does the firm stand in all of this? Quiet. Still. But don't mistake that for weakness. Because for every story Meghan told, they've kept receipts. And now that Harry's asking questions, they're finally answering them. Not publicly, but directly. Because they want him back. Not just the man, the truth. And they're willing to let him see the files Meghan never wanted opened. What's in those files? Documents, photos, and one very personal email, sent by Meghan, never meant to be seen again. But it survived. And when Harry opens it, everything he thought he knew unravels. You don't wake up one day and realize you're alone. It doesn't hit you like a brick to the face. It seeps in, quietly, slowly, until one day you look around and realize, no one's left. That's what insiders now say about Prince Harry. That by the time he opened that email, the one Meghan thought was gone, deleted, forgotten, he was already isolated. Cut off from the people who knew him, the people who loved him, the people who would have told him the truth years ago, if he'd only listened. So how does someone go from the most beloved younger royal to the man in the Montecito mansion, pacing alone with noise-canceling headphones and unanswered questions? This wasn't just a breakup of a family. This was surgical. A slow erasure of every voice that didn't match hers. And that email was the blueprint. Here's what we know. It was sent in August 2019, 6 months before Meghan and Harry officially announced their exit from royal life. Subject line, boundaries, non-negotiable. It was addressed to a private PR consultant, someone outside the royal network but inside Meghan's own inner circle. The email didn't talk about Harry's feelings. It didn't talk about stress, anxiety, or love. It talked about control. Specifically, Meghan laid out her concerns with unfiltered access points to Harry. Translation: people who could influence him. Family, friends, staff, anyone who wasn't her. And she didn't mince words. Here's one verified line, quoted by a former aide who leaked the document. He's too easily swayed by guilt. We have to control the inputs or we lose the narrative. Stop and think about that. We have to control the inputs. That's not how you talk about a partner. That's how you talk about a project. Or a puppet. And Meghan followed through. In the months that followed that email, one by one, Harry's connections began to fade. First, his friends. Longtime army mates. College drinking buddies. Old pals from Eton and Sandhurst. People who'd stood by him after his mother died. People who kept his secrets. people who weren't afraid to call him out. One friend, anonymously quoted in a 2023 biography, said, "It was like we were being peeled away one by one. At first it was subtle, he stopped replying. Then it was clear. She didn't like us. They weren't progressive enough. They didn't understand what Harry needed now. They were problematic. And Harry believed it. Or at least he said he did." Next came the staff. Not the institution staff, the personal ones. Harry had a few trusted people, especially from his Invictus Games and mental health campaigns. Loyal, kind, discreet. Gone. Replaced by Meghan's people. Americans. Industry types. Handpicked by her, not vetted by the royals. And every time Harry asked a question, it was framed as criticism. "Why don't you trust me? Why are you doubting this? Are you taking their side again?" Over time, it became easier not to ask. Easier to nod. Easier to agree. But the real heartbreak was family. Because if Meghan had one mission inside the palace, it was this. Separate Harry from William. That was the power base. The bond no one could break. The heir and the spare. But closer than most brothers ever were. William had always been Harry's anchor. And Meghan saw that. So she chipped away. Not with obvious sabotage, but with suggestion. "Do you think he's jealous of us? Why does he always undermine you? Did he even support our wedding?" And Harry, already sensitive, already grieving his mother, already struggling with being the second son, listened. He absorbed it. And when William did try to step in, cautiously, respectfully, like an older brother, Harry exploded. You've heard the stories. The confrontation. The shouting match. The alleged physical altercation. William grabbing Harry by the collar and shoving him into a wall. Was it exaggerated? Maybe. But the damage? Real. Because after that, Harry was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. He'd chosen a side. And it wasn't William's. Now, from the outside, it looked like independence. A new start. A modern family forging their own path. But behind the scenes, it was textbook isolation. Classic emotional triangulation. Anyone who questioned Meghan was cast as the enemy. Anyone who loved Harry enough to challenge him was discarded. And it worked. Because by the time Harry and Meghan landed in Canada, then California, there was no one left to intervene. No William. No Charles. No friends. Only her. Now imagine this. You're Harry. You've just read that email. You see the plan in writing. You realize she wasn't just defensive. She was strategic. She wanted you alone. Because alone, you were easier to shape. And now, years later, you finally see the pattern. The warning signs. The cold silences. The people who left you, but maybe were pushed out. And the woman you thought was your safe place was just making sure no one else had a key. Here's the twist. According to a palace insider, someone tried to warn him. An older member of the family, not Charles, not William. Someone quieter. Behind the scenes. They requested a private meeting. They told him gently that they were concerned. That they'd seen this kind of isolation before. That love should never cost you everyone else you care about. And you know what Harry said? Reportedly, he stood up, stared at the person and said, "Don't speak about her again. Ever." And then he walked out. That was then. Now, he's rereading that moment in his head with a whole new lens. Because once you realize the isolation was designed, not accidental, once you see that the people you shut out were the only ones telling you the truth, the shame hits hard. And here's where the emotional spiral begins. Because this isn't just betrayal. It's regret. Regret for torching bridges. For ending friendships. For turning his back on the brother who raised him. All for someone who may have engineered it by design. But the story's not over. Because while Harry's world shrank, Meghan's expanded. New circles. New contacts. Hollywood. Brands. Deals. She didn't isolate with him. She isolated him, then kept climbing. And now, with the old files surfacing, with staff whispering again, with the palace slowly but surely extending feelers, Harry is standing in the middle of the battlefield she built. And for the first time, he's not sure what side he's on anymore. And then comes a phone call from someone he never expected to hear from again. A royal aide, an old one, trusted. And they say 6 words. There's something else you need to see. What could be worse than hearing her voice in those tapes? Worse than reading the files? Worse than the email? Worse than the realization that everything you believed, everything you sacrificed for, may have been part of a long game you never saw coming? Only this, finding out she wrote it down, and meant every word. When the royal aide called Harry, they weren't offering sympathy. Not even an apology for staying silent so long. They were calling because they couldn't carry the burden anymore. And they had something in their possession. Something Meghan left behind in a drawer at Kensington Palace. Something no one was supposed to read. Not staff. Not family. Not Harry. Private journal. Handwritten. In ink. Unfiltered. Unpublished. And real. Let's back up. According to the source, the journal had been locked in a small lacquered case that Meghan used during her early time in the palace. At some point, amid the chaos of their move to Frogmore Cottage, the tour of Africa, the looming split, she forgot it, or maybe she never thought anyone would dare look. But it was found by a staff member. Never opened. Just labeled and stored away with other personal effects, as per protocol. Until now. Now that Harry was asking questions. Now that he wasn't blindly defending her anymore. Now that he wanted answers. The aide made a copy, and when Harry read the first page, his hands shook. It began innocently enough. A classic first journal entry. New chapter. New life. A chance to shape something bigger than myself. Hopeful. Ambitious. Personal. But as the entries continued, the tone shifted. She wrote about her first impressions of palace life. She described staffers as efficient but passive. She compared the formality of royal events to walking through a wax museum with beating hearts. She complained of sterile tradition and rigid hierarchy. All fair enough, but it's what came next that gutted Harry. One entry, written just 3 weeks after their wedding, included this line: "He's sweet, kind, broken, but usable." Usable, that word. It stared back at him like a curse. Not lovable. Not trustworthy. Not the love of my life. Usable. Like a tool. Like a prop. Like something to be leveraged. And she wasn't done. Another entry. Public adores him, but they don't see how easy he is to steer. He craves approval, anyone's. I can work with that. Page after page, lines like landmines. Sometimes she was affectionate. Sometimes cold. But always focused on image, control, power. One recurring phrase kept popping up in different forms. The message matters more than the moment. It was her mantra, not the marriage, not the connection, the message. There was one entry that stopped Harry cold. It was dated August 31st, the anniversary of Diana's death. Meghan had written only one sentence. His grief is his gravity. If I lean into it, he never floats away. No one else would have understood that. But Harry did. Because Diana was his anchor, his wound, his story. And Meghan had studied it, understood it, used it. That line shattered something in him. It wasn't even cruel. It was worse, it was calculated. She didn't exploit his grief in a fit of rage. She scheduled it, like a publicist crafting a press release. She wrote that entry not as a wife, but as a strategist. There were no love letters in this journal. No intimate reflections on their connection. Only breakdowns of what to say, when to say it, and how to make it hit. Harry described it to a friend, reportedly, as finding out you were married to a writer, and the book was about using you to climb. Still not convinced? Here's one more bombshell. In the weeks leading up to their Oprah interview, Meghan allegedly wrote this in the journal. This will either be the start of our new empire, or the beginning of the end. Either way, the spotlight stays on us. Think about that. It wasn't about healing. It wasn't about truth. It was about coverage, perception, maintaining the attention, good or bad. And what did the world do after that interview? Exploded. Exactly as planned. But there's a question hanging in the air, and it's a heavy one. Was Meghan ever truly in love with Harry? It's impossible to say. Maybe she was. Maybe it started with real connection and turned into something colder. But when you write about someone as useful before your first anniversary, when you track their trauma like an influencer planning a photo op, when you manipulate their isolation in your own handwriting, you don't get to call that love. You don't even get to call it loyalty. You call it what it is: exploitation. And now Harry finally sees it. The journal was 147 pages long. He read all of it in one night. Didn't sleep. Didn't eat. Just sat at the same desk where he once wrote his vows. And this time, the words on the page weren't a promise. They were a warning. The next morning he made a decision. Not about divorce. Not about press. About contact. He picked up the phone. Not to call Meghan, but to call someone else. Someone from the past. And he said only this: "I need to talk. And this time, I'll listen." But before he can do that, something else arrives. A file. Anonymous. No return address. Just a note. This is the one thing she hoped you'd never see. And inside, a transcript of a conversation Meghan had with someone Harry knows. The cameras stopped rolling. The lights dimmed. The world exploded. But that's not when it fell apart for Harry. It was after. After the headlines. After the hashtags. After the global wave of sympathy and outrage. That's when the real damage began. Because the interview you saw, edited, polished, explosive, was only half the story. There was another version. The one that didn't make it to air. The one Harry didn't know about. Until now. And the transcript? It changes everything. Let's rewind to March 7th, 2021. Oprah, Meghan, Harry, a California garden. A soft-lit, carefully framed portrait of truth-telling. Meghan made the world lean in. I was silenced. There were concerns about Archie's skin color. I didn't want to be alive anymore. Gut-wrenching stuff. And Harry? He followed suit. Tight-lipped. Protective. Hurt. But behind the scenes, there were murmurs. About edits. About content cut at the last minute. And about a very specific post-interview conversation one Meghan had off-camera, but still recorded. With someone Harry knew. Someone from the production team. Someone who made a transcript and sent it to him anonymously. The transcript begins roughly 20 minutes after the interview ends. Meghan is off mic, but not off record. She's talking with a producer, name redacted, but known to be friendly with her inner circle. She thinks the cameras are down. She thinks it's just a recap. She starts going over the interview like a strategist reviewing a press release. And what she says? Well, it doesn't sound like someone emotionally shattered. It sounds like someone pleased. Triumphant. Here's the first line. That went better than I expected. Oprah gave me exactly what I needed. What she needed. Not what felt honest. Not what helped me heal. Not what the world had to hear. What she needed. It gets worse. The producer, trying to keep the tone casual, asks if Meghan feels like she got her message across. Meghan laughs, then says, "They'll believe whatever they want to. I just gave them enough." Enough. As in, not everything. Not truth. Just enough. Let that land for a second. Because that sentence flips the entire Oprah narrative on its head. What if the most iconic, emotional interview of the decade was partially a performance? Not necessarily a lie, but a curated version of events designed not to reveal pain, but to sell it. And what about Harry? He sat next to her the entire time, defending her, echoing her story, confirming her trauma. But in this transcript, she refers to him only once. And this is what she says: "I think he handled it okay. He's not used to this kind of messaging. But he stayed in the frame, and that's what matters. He stayed in the frame. Not he spoke his truth. Not he supported me. Not he opened up. He stayed in the frame. As in, he did his job. As in, he hit his mark." If Harry had doubts before, this confirmed them. But the line that haunted him was near the end. Meghan, chatting freely, mentions how long it took to prep the interview. She says, "Honestly, I've been shaping this for over a year. It had to build to something. There it is again. The planning. The slow burn. The rollout. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a campaign launch. And it worked. The media exploded. The royal family scrambled. Public opinion shifted overnight. But at what cost? Behind closed doors, the palace was shattered. The Queen blindsided. Charles livid. William furious. And Harry? Now seeing clearly for the first time, he realized he was part of the rollout. What did Meghan mean by shaping this for over a year? Insiders say she had been keeping detailed records, emails, texts, receipts from the start, curating moments, documenting tension, cataloging every slight, but not to resolve them internally, to weaponize them later. And Oprah wasn't the climax. She was the delivery system. The Queen couldn't respond. William wouldn't. The firm's silence only amplified Meghan's story. And now, with the transcript in hand, Harry sees it for what it was, an unchallenged narrative because Meghan knew no one could challenge it. So what didn't you see in the interview? A lot. There were segments filmed but cut for legal sensitivity, like Meghan naming the family member allegedly concerned about Archie's skin tone, or her suggestion that Charles cut off security as a warning, not a policy. Or a dig at Kate that producers allegedly pulled at the last second to avoid inflaming tensions. And one especially chilling moment, according to a crew member, when Meghan turned to a staffer during a break and asked, "Do you think I'll be the most famous woman in the world after this?" That was never supposed to be heard, never supposed to be recorded. But someone was rolling. And now Harry knows. He didn't confront her immediately. He sat with it, reread the transcript 3 times. Went back to the tapes, listened for inflection, for performance, for proof. And it was there. Subtle, but real. This wasn't an emotionally fragile woman cracking under pressure. This was someone in control, delivering beats like a seasoned speaker, hitting emotional highs, pausing for silence, pivoting away from danger. She didn't misspeak. She never stumbled. She nailed it. And Harry finally saw the director behind the curtain. There's one final note on the transcript, scrawled in pen at the bottom, not by Meghan, not by the producer, but by whoever sent it. It reads, "You weren't her audience. You were her asset." That line cut deeper than anything in the tapes. Because if that was true, if Harry was never the intended recipient of Meghan's story, if he was just the vessel to get it told, then everything was part of a performance. From the wedding, to the exit, to the interview, and now, to the marriage itself. So what does he do now? Stay? Speak? Escape? The walls are closing in, and the image is cracking. But before he can decide his next move, another message arrives. This one from someone inside the palace. Just 5 words. She read the Queen's letter.